Hello everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of Planeswalking with the Professors. Today is the final week of previews before the pre-release, but as of writing this, all 145 cards of Conflux have been spoiled on MTGSalvation. Some from reprints, some come from people who just seemingly remember, oh yeah, this card that hasn't been printed yet does this! And some previews being gotten from the official spoilers given to the sites around the net. And one particular is Scarland Thrinax. I wonder who's the lucky guy that got to spoil this. I mean, the official site says that it was spoiled by Plaingames.com. But for some reason, when I go to this site, the preview is not to be found. And for some reason, when I go to MTGSalvation, it says that Scarland Thrinax was spoiled by the person named YouTube Preview. But when I click on it, it just brings me to some weird video that... Wait a minute. So let's draw. So let's start this week by justifying a couple of statements that pertain to the last 2 weeks of spoilers. I've been criticized many times in the past about saying how good a card was and for what absurdly elaborate reason, and I understand why I will continually get criticized and that many people will have varying opinions. However, let's retrace my logic for these spoilers. 2 weeks ago, it was stated that Guildspire Avenger is not actually as good as I said. Nixathid is awful, Ancient Ziggurat is pretty limited, and Reliquary Tower was better than I thought. I disagree, but let me elaborate. Guildspire Avenger is actually better than you might think, not just in limited when you have the ability to halt what your opponent was doing, being however strong their force is, save if that force includes a stupidly large Progenitus, as Exalted wanted you to do. This allows you to then sit back and hold your position if your opponent gets any real threat, or go in if your opponent has quite usually something with less than 4 power ready to mobilize. Then there was Nixathid. Looking back at episode 61's script, I said that this card would be particularly effective in Standard. I still believe so. Within the last week, I've gotten my future Standard Elementals deck up to a record of 12-2. And you know what those 2 losses were from? Mono-black discard with both builds I played running Nixathid. The deck will almost always drop a Raven's Crime or Thoughtseize on turn 1, a Ravenous or Rotting Rats on turn 2, and just plain get there with what will surely be a turn 4 5/5 Nixathid or turn 4 Red Zone Hippie. Oh yeah, did I mention the deck also runs Demigod of Revenge, which is utterly impossible to play against unless your deck has a perfect streak of aggro, in my case meaning turn 2 Smokebraid or turn 3 Horde of Notions, and even then Nixathid can almost always handle the Horde of Notions on turns 5 and up. The only complaint I have about this deck is not that it wins in a cheap way, and not that you can play any hand and get to victory, because you can't, and we all know that turn 4 Chameleon Colossus is just a table turner, but rather the fact that discard can never cast the discard spell at instant speed. Maybe it's just me, but I've always liked to do something at instant speed. As I've said before, I always love being able to Jet on Mind trick my opponent into thinking I don't have any responses or I'm stuck until next turn, then going off and slamming down an answer or a burn spell at end of turn. On the other hand, I've always liked the concept of knowing what my opponent can play and when. For example, if you head into round 4 and you heard from your buddy who is playing this guy in round 3 that he's playing some variant of Fairies, I think it's fair to conclude this. Your opponent will be running 4 main deck Bitter Blossom, at least 2 main deck Mistbind Click, 4 Spellstutter Sprite, and 4 Mutavault. How will this help you more so than if you had just sat down and saw that your opponent dropped a turn 1 Island and second turn Swamp Bitter Blossom go? Well, fact is, it won't. For this factor, I've always liked cards like Telepathy because, from an aggro point of view, it tells you a lot more of what you needed to know. However, fact is, when was the last time that you saw a real aggro deck that could consistently drop a turn 1 Telepathy? Never? Point is, I'll make my opinion heard now that I would love to see a Telepathy in red or green, or a version of that card, for maybe an extra mana with Flash, because in Magic, information is everything. Next from this comment is Ancient Ziggurat. How could you not like this card? This is the card that inspired me to make a 5-color Elementals deck in the first place, and as I said 2 weeks ago, the reflecting pools that fuel the mana in the deck can be turned on by Primal Beyond, Ancient Ziggurat, or any of the 5 Vivid lands that it runs, and it will also allow you to consistently cast a turn 4 or 5 Revel Arcs and Horde of Notions with the only non-creature spells operating for the sake of the only thing the creature spells couldn't do, burn up the early game with the Incinerate and Fire Spout. Finally, from this comment is Reliquary Tower. Okay, so maybe we'll have to see about if there really is a standstill that deck, but the only remote chance of that deck being competitive would be in Legacy, and don't forget, BDU, if I'm correct, this deck could never ever run Reliquary Tower because there are already so few basic lands that actually produce colors, lots of hate that destroys basic lands, and quite frankly, if there's ever a time when you need to keep cards and aren't pitching them for the sake of getting out a Tombstalker or boosting a Termagoyf, chances are you wouldn't be able to cast 7 counterspells on one turn despite Legacy's crazy play. Second to last in the comment line is that which said that I'd be dumbed for thinking that Thornling would hit the $50 mark. Do I still think this? Yes, I still do. The reason is this. Because any particular mythic rare is twice as rare as a regular rare in particular, it only has to be worth $25 if it were hypothetically a rare. Additionally, there's always been the mentality that players of any game or users of any product come to associate an emotion with. The example here would be the fact that whenever I see a mythic rare, even if it's crap, I'm slightly more excited for the fact that the card is just rarer. However, if I open a pack and get a Keterat Leviathan, I am not in the least bit excited. I think it's fair to say that Mael the Anima is absolutely useless. I have never seen the card played, not in a limited deck, Aggro Naya deck, Realm Razor deck, or even in some wacky combo deck. And I think it's fair to say that Keterat Leviathan is the same. At least, if nothing else, I've seen this card played in some limited deck somewhere. However, when we check the prices on the Leviathan, we see that the card is worth 50 cents. However, on Mael the Anima, it's $2.50. Therefore showing that despite both cards have equally low use, Mael is still worth 5 times as much instead of 2 times as much. Being that Conflux is a smaller set, this won't necessarily apply, but if I may have my calculations correct, Thornling will hit the $50 price mark, being only worth $20 if it were a rare. Theoretically though, why is Thornling so playable? I mean, this viewer had a fine point in saying that Morphling and Torchling were just okay. However, looking back, the Onslaught and Time Spiral metagames were considerably slower, and often didn't allow time or room to play a 5-drop that just ate up mana. However, you'll notice that both Morphling and Torchling could just have chump blockers put in front of them, even if Morphling could get flying, and they would just die. They were also both, while untappable for the sake of blocking, still 3/3s, which made them that much more frail for when you were tapped out, after going in for just 1 point less than the kill. However, first of all, in hard times for Thornling, he is a 4/4, which means he'll pretty much only be dying to Flame Javelin or Terror. Second, he has the mana ability for Shroud, so if your opponent really had planned out that Flame Jab or Terror, you could still save it. Third, he tramples, which ultimately ends with the stop damage theory. And fourth, Thornling is an elemental. This fact is absolutely insane. In my future standard elemental deck, this guy is sure to be a star, as you can accelerate to him on turn 3 with Smoke Barrier, charge in with him on turn 4 with Incandescent Soulstoke, resurrect him with Horde of Notions, or just plain run in with a 7/1 trampling indestructible creature later in the game. But onto the real spoilers, we see some incredible hate, where Wizards clearly really wants to push the hate a lot with cards like Flash Freeze and Deathmark, and they did. The first of two that I noticed was Celestial Purge, and being that hybrid and multicolor are so dominant and this spell can be used at instant speed to kill nearly half of the prominent bombs in the standard meta, aside from Chameleon Colossus or, say, Thornling, but hey, play your cards right, and I'm sure we'll be seeing this card in main decks and sideboards of blue-white and mono-white control decks for years to come. Speaking of these annoying green creatures, if you have any issues with stopping them, there's always Controlled Instincts. In almost any deck with blue, this may be a main deck choice, and if not that, it will certainly fit into the sideboard. And in red, to what the rumor mongers refer to as the bad fire, is Quenchable Fire. But it would appear as if the citizens of MTGSalvation community agree with me in saying that this card doesn't seem that bad and seems like a solid sideboard choice. And sure, your opponent has to not be playing blue, which is very rare in these days, but nonetheless, I expect to make more than the small cinder in the metagame. And finally, in multicolor, I'll give a shout out to the last two major cards we'll give some consideration to today are Child of Alara and Maelstrom Angel. Can you imagine the metagame that we would be in right now if fairies and 5-color control hadn't screwed everything up? We'd have the fantastically strategic and well different but balanced tribal decks with their average lords and harbingers to search and manipulate that annoying thing called chance, the great Esper aggro and control decks with the Master of Ethereums, and what would be a balanced cryptic command unable to be casted until 5th or 6th turn, because you never dropped that double counter Vivid Marsh and Reflecting Pools, and cards like Child of Alara were splashable in every deck and worked equally. Wouldn't that be nice? Instead, we get the domination and incredible resilience of fairies, which, while it would appear is finally being struck down, is now being replaced by 5-color control decks that will now just cast a Child of Alara or Maelstrom Angel, then play a Cruel Ultimatum next turn at times for free, and just finish the game. Well, I guess we'll have to see how that all goes down. So until next time when we come to you from the Conflux pre-release live in Edison, Jiffy's, and Philadelphia, this is the Card Professor tapped out for now, but we'll be back soon. The Professors is brought to you by TrollandToad.com, MTGMintCard.com, CardHorder.com, and Jiffy's Photo and Baseball Cards. Shards of Alara is here and known, and it looks extremely tasty, so have your mouse on the order button at TrollandToad.com, MTGMintCard.com, and CardHorder.com, or support the show and head on down to Jiffy's Photo and Baseball Cards today.